Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Ryan Torres always thought he knew every inch of that forest, until he found the cabin that didn't exist on the maps, and realized someone was watching him discover it. That's when everything he thought he understood about Olympic National Park turned into a nightmare that still wakes him up in cold sweats here in Texas. If you're into real horror stories from people who lived through them, hit that subscribe button because this one's going to stick with you. The whole thing started simple enough. October 15th, 2019. Ember Vaughn, 23-year-old nature photographer from Portland, had been documenting the elk migration patterns in the Hoh River area. Professional setup, expensive gear, knew what she was doing. She'd checked in with the ranger station every day for a week, then nothing. Radio silence for 48 hours. Ryan had been working Olympic for 3 years by then. Came up from California after finishing his forestry degree. Thought he was hot shit because he could track a field mouse through a rainstorm. And honestly, he was that good. While other rangers would miss obvious signs, Ryan could spot a bent twig from 50 yards and tell you exactly how much someone weighed by the depth of their footprint in mud. It wasn't just training. He had this weird intuition about tracking that even the veteran rangers couldn't explain. Torres has eyes like a goddamn bloodhound, his supervisor Martinez used to say. Kid can find evidence the FBI misses. So when Ember went missing, Ryan volunteered for the search team. Standard protocol, nothing fancy. Check her last known camping area, follow any trails, bring her home safe. Easy Tuesday morning in the Pacific Northwest. Except Tuesday turned into Wednesday, and Wednesday turned into the worst night of Ryan's life. The first thing that should have tipped him off was how quiet the forest was. October in Olympic means constant rain, animals moving around, that familiar Northwest soundtrack of dripping and rustling. But when Ryan reached Ember's last known coordinates around 2 p.m., the silence felt wrong. Like everything with sense had packed up and left. He found her campsite easily enough. Too easily. Tent still up, camera equipment scattered but not damaged, sleeping bag laid out like she'd just stepped away. But no Ember. Ryan's tracking instincts kicked in immediately. He circled the campsite in expanding spirals, looking for footprints, disturbed vegetation, anything that would tell him which direction she'd gone. That's when he found the first set of prints that made his stomach drop. Combat boots, size 11, worn heel on the left foot, deep impression suggesting someone carrying extra weight. Military training taught guys to move differently than civilians. Longer strides, deliberate foot placement, weight distributed to minimize noise. Ryan had seen enough veteran hikers to recognize the pattern. But these prints were deliberately placed around Ember's camp, circling, watching. Someone's been surveilling this site, Ryan radioed back to base. Need backup and a crime scene team. The response crackled back through static. Negative, Torres, complete your sweep first, could be another hiker who found the site. Ryan knew better. His tracking instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but protocol was protocol. He followed the boot prints away from the campsite, deeper into the old-growth cedar and hemlock that made Olympic feel like hiking through a cathedral. That's when he found the cabin, hidden about half a mile from Ember's camp, tucked into a natural depression and camouflaged with fallen branches and moss. Ryan pulled out his GPS unit and cross-referenced the coordinates with his park maps. According to every official record, nothing should be there, just forest. But there it was, small, maybe 12x12 feet, built from local timber and clearly constructed by someone who knew what they were doing. No windows, single door, chimney made from stacked river stones. Recent construction, maybe a few months old. Ryan approached carefully, hand on his radio. The door was secured with a simple wooden latch, no lock. He pushed it open and immediately wished he hadn't. The interior was a hunter's wet dream. Military surplus gear hung from wall pegs. Compound bow with modified arrows. Knives ranging from field dressing blades to combat tactical. A rifle scope that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly salary. And maps, Detailed topographical maps of Olympic National Park with areas marked in red ink. But what made Ryan's blood freeze were the photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to one wall like trophies. Hikers, campers, backpackers, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Men, women, solo travelers, couples. Some photos showed people setting up camp. Others showed them sleeping. A few showed them hiking alone on remote trails. Ember Vaughn's face stared back at him from at least 10 different photos. Ryan was reaching for his radio when he heard the footstep behind him. Find something interesting? The voice was calm, conversational, with just a hint of amusement. Ryan spun around to find a man in his 40s blocking the doorway. Military buzzcut going gray, weathered face, and the kind of relaxed posture that suggested he was completely in control of the situation. "I'm Ranger Torres," Ryan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is federal parkland. You're camping illegally." The man laughed. "Camping? Son, I live here. Have for about 8 months now. And you're trespassing." "Sir, I need you to step aside so I can..." "So you can what? Call for backup?" The man held up a small electronic device. "Signal jammer, military grade. Your radio's been dead since you got within a quarter mile of this place." Ryan's hand went to his radio. Static. His satellite phone. Nothing. The GPS unit showed his location as signal not found. "See, here's the thing," the man continued, stepping into the cabin and closing the door behind him. "I've been watching you track me for the last hour. Pretty good skills for a college boy. Better than most of the weekend warriors they send out here. Where's Ember Vaughn? The photographer? She's fine. For now." The man gestured to a chair made from lashed branches. "Sit down, Torres. We need to talk." "I'm not sitting anywhere. You're under arrest for..." "For what? Living off-grid? Taking pictures?" The man's demeanor shifted, and Ryan caught a glimpse of something predatory in his eyes. "You know what I did for 12 years before I came here? Special forces, reconnaissance, human tracking. What's your name?" "Call me Hunter. It's what I do now." Hunter moved to the wall of photographs, running his finger along them. "See, after the Army decided they didn't need my services anymore, I discovered I had particular skills that translated well to civilian life. Tracking, surveillance, patience." Ryan's mind was racing. This wasn't a simple missing person case anymore. This was a predator who'd been operating in Olympic for months, possibly longer. And Ryan had walked right into his trap. "The thing about hunting animals," Hunter continued, "is that it gets boring after a while. They're predictable. Follow the same trails, drink from the same streams, run when they're scared. But humans? Humans are interesting. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about the ultimate hunt, apex predator versus apex prey, and I've gotten very good at it." Ryan felt his training kick in. Stay calm, gather information, look for opportunities. "How many? You really want to know?" Hunter pulled down one of the maps, revealing a collection of driver's licenses pinned to the wall underneath. 15 over the last 2 years. Started down in Oregon, worked my way north. Olympic's been perfect. Huge park, thousands of visitors. Easy to make people disappear. The licenses showed faces Ryan recognized from missing person reports. Cases that had gone cold, assumed to be accidental deaths or people who'd simply vanished in the wilderness. "The photographer was supposed to be number 16, Hunter said. "But then you showed up with your fancy tracking skills, and I thought, why not make this interesting?" "Where is she?" "Safe for now. She's bait, Torres. For you." Hunter pulled a compound bow from the wall, testing the string tension. "See, I've been watching you work for 3 days now, following your search patterns, monitoring your radio chatter. You're not like the other rangers. You see things they miss, find trails they walk right past." Ryan's special tracking ability had always been an asset. Now it had made him a target. "So here's the game," Hunter continued. "You get a 30-minute head start. Try to find your photographer friend and get out of my forest alive. I'll come after you with traditional hunting gear, bow, knife, survival skills. No guns, no technology, Just man versus man. This is insane. This is evolution, natural selection in real time. Hunter knocked an arrow and pointed it casually at Ryan's chest. You can run now, or I can put this through your lung and drag you out to play anyway. Your choice. Ryan looked at the door, calculating distances and angles. Hunter was relaxed but alert, the bow held with practiced ease. Military training meant he'd be fast and accurate, but Ryan had something Hunter didn't expect, an almost supernatural ability to read terrain and tracks. 30 minutes, Ryan said. Starting now. Ryan bolted for the door, hearing Hunter's laughter behind him. The moment he cleared the cabin, he was analyzing the forest around him with new eyes. This wasn't a search and rescue anymore. This was survival. The October afternoon was fading fast in the Pacific Northwest, which meant he had maybe 2 hours of usable light. After that, the forest would belong to whoever knew it better. And Hunter had been living here for 8 months, but Ryan had advantages Hunter didn't know about. While other people saw trees and underbrush, Ryan saw a three-dimensional map of movement and possibility. Every broken branch, every displaced stone, every patch of disturbed earth told him a story. He followed his own trail back toward Ember's campsite, but stopped after 50 yards. Too obvious. Hunter would expect him to retrace his steps. Instead, Ryan cut north, following a game trail that paralleled his original route. His tracking instincts were screaming with information. Deer had used this path recently. Something large had passed through going east, and there were human footprints, fresh ones. Ryan knelt and examined the prints carefully. Hiking boots size 7, shorter stride pattern suggesting a woman. Ember's tracks, leading away from her campsite in a direction the official search team hadn't checked yet. But these weren't the tracks of someone wandering lost. They were too deliberate, spaced too evenly. Someone being forced to walk at a steady pace. Ryan followed the trail with growing urgency. The tracks led deeper into the old-growth section of Olympic, where 800-year-old cedars created a canopy so thick that daylight barely penetrated even at noon. Perfect hunting ground for someone who knew how to use darkness as a weapon. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, Ryan found her. Ember Vaughn was alive, tied to a massive cedar tree about 3 miles from her original campsite. Conscious but gagged, her photographer's eye immediately recognizing Ryan as potential rescue. She was using her bound hands to point frantically toward something behind him. Ryan spun around to find Hunter perched on a fallen log about 30 yards away, bow drawn and aimed directly at Ryan's chest. "Impressive," Hunter called out. "Found her faster than I expected. That tracking thing you do, it's not just training, is it? You've got some kind of natural talent. Let her go. Your problem is with me. My problem is that you're better than you should be. Makes the hunt more interesting." Hunter's voice carried easily through the forest quiet. "But also more dangerous. Can't have someone with your skills telling stories." Ryan was calculating angles and distances when Ember managed to work the gag loose. "There are others," she shouted. "He's got—" Hunter's arrow took out a chunk of bark 6 inches from her head. "Quiet. Others?" Ryan kept his voice calm, but his mind was racing. 3 more hikers. He's keeping them in a cave system about a mile north. Says he likes to collect them for special occasions. Hunter knocked another arrow. "She talks too much. Most of them do, eventually." Ryan's tracking instincts suddenly shifted into overdrive. While he'd been focused on the immediate threat, his subconscious had been cataloging everything else around them. Wind direction, animal movement patterns, the way sound carried through the trees, and one detail that could change everything. Hunter was positioned downwind, which meant he couldn't smell what Ryan could smell. Smoke. Wood smoke. Very faint coming from the north. A campfire, which meant other people in the area. But more importantly, Ryan had noticed something about Hunter's positioning that revealed a crucial weakness. The man was military trained, which meant he thought tactically. But Ryan had spent 3 years learning Olympics-specific terrain, and Hunter had made a mistake. The fallen log Hunter was using for cover was positioned directly over what local rangers called a root well, a hidden depression created when massive old-growth trees fell and their root systems pulled up sections of earth. From Hunter's angle, it would look like solid ground behind the log, but Ryan could see the subtle difference in vegetation that marked the hollow space. "You know what your problem is?" Ryan called out, slowly moving to position himself at a better angle. "You think like a soldier, but this isn't a battlefield. Enlighten me. This is my forest, and you're standing in a root well." Hunter glanced down just as Ryan grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it with everything he had. Not at Hunter, but at the rotted section of the fallen log directly above the hidden depression. 800 years of Pacific Northwest rain had turned the cedar's heartwood into something barely stronger than cardboard. The rock punched through, and Hunter's makeshift perch collapsed, dropping him 6 feet into the root well with a crash that echoed through the forest. Ryan was moving before Hunter hit bottom, covering the 30 yards in seconds. By the time Hunter struggled to his feet with a clearly dislocated shoulder, Ryan had the compound bow. "Game over." Hunter laughed, even with an arrow pointed at his chest. "You think this ends with me? There are others like me out there, Torres. Predators who figured out that the real hunting grounds are places like this." "Maybe, but you're done hunting." Ryan kept the bow trained on Hunter while cutting Ember free. Her photographer's instincts had her immediately documenting everything with her phone: the illegal camp, the trophy wall, Hunter's face. "The others," she said urgently. "The cave system. We have to. We will. But first we get you somewhere safe and call for real backup." It took them 3 hours to hike out of the forest, with Ryan following GPS coordinates on Ember's phone once they were clear of Hunter's signal jammer. Hunter walked ahead of them, hands zip-tied with gear from Ryan's pack, occasionally offering commentary on the tracking techniques he'd observed. "You really are good at this," Hunter said as they reached the ranger station. "Waste of talent, working for the Park Service. Someone with your skills could make serious money in the private sector." Ryan didn't respond. He was already thinking about the other victims Hunter had mentioned, the cave system they'd need to search, the investigation that would follow. But mostly, he was thinking about how close he'd come to becoming just another missing person report. The FBI arrived 6 hours later, followed by search teams, crime scene specialists, and enough federal agents to turn the Olympic Peninsula into a small army base. They found Hunter's cave system exactly where Ember had indicated, along with 3 more victims: 2 hikers from California and a backpacker from Germany, all alive but traumatized. The investigation revealed that Hunter, whose real name was Marcus Webb, had been operating across multiple states for over 3 years. A former Army Ranger who'd been discharged for psychological incompatibility, he'd turned his military training into a twisted game of human hunting. The FBI credited Ryan's tracking skills with breaking open what they called one of the most sophisticated predator operations we've ever encountered. Ryan testified at Webb's trial 8 months later. Life without parole, 18 counts of kidnapping, multiple charges of assault and attempted murder. But what stuck with Ryan wasn't the courtroom victory. It was the look in Webb's eyes when the verdict was read. No remorse, no fear, just calculation, like he was already planning his next move from prison. That's when Ryan decided he was done with law enforcement altogether. He moved to Texas 3 months after the trial, trading Olympic's misty forests for Austin's urban landscape. Different job, environmental consulting for construction companies, but he still uses those tracking skills every day. Now he helps preserve natural spaces instead of hunting predators through them. The nightmares stopped after about a year, but Ryan still won't go camping alone. And he's never set foot in a national park since October 2019. Some people think that's letting Webb win, but Ryan sees it differently. He learned something important during those 8 hours in Olympic National Park. The most dangerous predators are the ones who look human. Ember Vaughn turned her experience into a documentary about predators operating in national parks. It won several film festival awards and led to increased safety protocols for solo hikers. She sends Ryan a Christmas card every year with a simple message: "Thank you for seeing what others missed." Because that's what saved them both in the end. Not weapons or backup or official protocols, but Ryan's ability to read the forest like a book that most people can't even open. Webb was military trained, experienced, and completely confident in his abilities. But he'd never encountered someone who could track evidence at the level Ryan could. The irony is that Webb's arrogance became his downfall. He was so confident in his tactical superiority that he never considered Ryan might have abilities that couldn't be taught in any military training program. When Webb positioned himself over that root well, he was thinking like a soldier using cover. But Ryan was thinking like someone who knew every square foot of that forest's unique terrain. These days, Ryan's tracking skills help identify environmental impacts for development projects. He can spot animal migration patterns that might be disrupted by construction, find water sources that need protection, trace erosion patterns that could cause problems years down the line. It's satisfying work that uses his abilities to preserve and protect rather than hunt. But sometimes when he's walking a potential construction site and notices something that doesn't belong, a footprint where there shouldn't be one, disturbed vegetation in an unnatural pattern, signs that someone has been watching from concealment, Ryan still gets that cold feeling between his shoulder blades that means predator in the area. The difference is that now he trusts that instinct completely, and he's learned that the most important thing you can do when you realize you're being hunted is to remember that being prey doesn't mean being helpless. Webb is still in federal prison, serving multiple life sentences. According to Ember's documentary research, there are at least 12 other similar cases across national parks in the last decade. Military-trained individuals who've turned wilderness areas into personal hunting grounds. Most are never caught because they choose victims who won't be missed immediately, and they understand how to make deaths look accidental. Ryan hopes his story helps other people recognize the signs. If you're hiking alone and notice someone taking pictures from a distance, trust your instincts. If your equipment starts failing in ways that don't make sense, consider that someone might be interfering with it. And if you find evidence of human presence in places where people shouldn't be, don't investigate alone. Most importantly, if you work in remote areas and you've got that weird feeling that something's watching you, listen to it. Ryan's tracking abilities saved his life, but what really made the difference was trusting his gut when everything felt wrong. The forest will always have predators. The key is making sure you're not easy prey. If you know someone who works in remote areas or enjoys solo hiking, share this story with them. These kinds of predators count on people not knowing what to look for. And if you want to hear more real accounts like this one, hit that subscribe button, because unfortunately Ryan's story isn't unique. There are others out there who've survived encounters with human predators and their experiences could save lives. Stay safe out there. And remember, the most dangerous thing in any wilderness isn't the wildlife. It's the humans who've learned to hunt other humans. Dylan's radio crackled with static at the exact moment he found the shredded tent, blood on the trees, and a trail that shouldn't have been there. He stopped, his breath forming clouds in the cold October air, and felt that familiar sensation in his gut. The same one he got when he found tracks where nobody else could see them. Except this time, every instinct screamed at him to run in the opposite direction. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because what happened next completely changed his life. Dylan Thorne lives in Austin, Texas today, where the constant heat and city noise help him sleep better than any forest ever could. But in October 2019, he was a 28-year-old forest ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington, and he had a weird reputation among his colleagues. While other rangers needed to call in specialists to analyze tracks, Dylan could read the forest like it whispered secrets just to him. The guy's freaky, Martinez, his most frequent partner, used to say. Dylan looks at the ground and sees things that don't exist. Then 5 hours later, we find exactly what he said we'd find. It wasn't magic. Dylan simply noticed things. The way branches broke, the pattern of trampled leaves, almost imperceptible marks on tree trunks. It was like his brain processed evidence on a different frequency. And in 5 years working at Olympic, that ability had saved the lives of 17 missing people. October was always the most dangerous time. Washington's constant rains turned trails into slippery traps. Darkness arrived at 5 in the afternoon, and tourists completely underestimated how brutal the temperate rainforest could be. Dylan had seen people die of hypothermia in less than 6 hours, And that wasn't exactly the kind of thing you forget. Kira Velasco should have been just another routine case. A 24-year-old freelance photographer specializing in wildlife, she had permission to camp alone in the northern area of the park to document elk migration. Planned, experienced, proper equipment. The kind of person who usually doesn't disappear. But on October 15th, she missed her radio check-in, and on October 16th, Dylan was being assigned to find her. The morning started normal. Dylan rolled his eyes when he saw he'd be working alone. Martinez had called in sick and Robertson was off duty. Typical. Whenever there was a difficult case, he ended up dealing with it solo. Her last known position was on the Hoh River Trail, Sergeant Collins explained during the briefing. Full equipment, satellite radio, GPS. She knows the area. Weather conditions last night? Heavy rain until 2 in the morning, then it cleared up. Dylan nodded. Rain meant any tracks would be well preserved in the muddy ground. If Kira had left the trail, he'd find where she went. What he didn't expect was to find her tent completely destroyed. Not torn by a bear. Dylan knew how to recognize animal attacks. The marks were made by a blade, precise and deliberate cuts. The tent had been opened methodically, as if someone was looking for something specific, and there was blood. Not much, just a few dark drops on nearby leaves, already half-washed by the morning rain, but enough to make Dylan's stomach turn. He keyed his radio. Static. Base, this is Dylan. Found Velasco's campsite. Situation complicated. More static. Then Collins's distorted voice. Dylan, your interference. A repeat. Base, I'm at her position. The tent was destroyed. There's evidence of... The radio died completely. Dylan cursed under his breath and adjusted the antenna. Nothing. Strange. That model worked even in storms. He stowed the equipment and focused on what he did best. Reading the signs. The footprints around the campsite told a disturbing story. Kira had arrived the previous afternoon. Her boots left clear marks on the main trail. She'd set up the tent, lit a small camp stove, ashes still visible, and probably had dinner. Normal so far. But there were other prints. Dylan crouched down, studying almost imperceptible depressions in the wet soil. Military boots, size 12. Wear pattern indicating someone who walked silently, distributing weight evenly. Whoever it was knew how to move through the forest without making noise, and these prints circled Kira's campsite like a predator studying prey. Son of a bitch, Dylan muttered, following the trail with his eyes. The military prints appeared and disappeared among the trees, always keeping distance from the campsite, as if the person had watched Kira for hours before acting. The blood trail led north, toward a dense area of forest where tourists rarely ventured. Dylan checked his GPS, still working at least. He marked the position and began following the tracks. That's when he realized he wasn't tracking just one person. Kira's footprints were there too, but strange, irregular steps as if she was being forced to walk. And there was something else. A third set of tracks, smaller, lighter, that appeared and disappeared almost ghost-like. Dylan stopped. In 5 years, he'd never seen tracks so methodical. Whoever owned those military boots was trying to confuse anyone who came looking, creating false trails, erasing marks, even placing broken branches in specific places to misdirect attention. But Dylan saw through the confusion. It was like the forest was whispering the truth only to him. The real trail led to a cabin, not an official park cabin. Dylan knew every registered structure in his area, and that building simply shouldn't exist. It was hidden among enormous trees, camouflaged with branches and leaves almost professionally. If it weren't for the tracks leading directly to it, he never would have noticed. And there was light on inside. Dylan approached slowly, trying to control his breathing. Through a dirty window he could see movement. Someone was in there pacing back and forth. He tried the radio again. Dead. Cell phone. No signal. Shit. Dylan was considering his options when he heard the voice. I know you're out there. Male, calm, with an accent Dylan couldn't identify, coming from inside the cabin. Why don't you come in? I'm sure you want to see your friend. Dylan's blood ran cold. He stepped away from the window, heart racing, and noticed something he'd missed before. Military prints around the entire cabin. Recent, as if the person inside had gone out to scout the area in the last few minutes. She's fine, if that worries you. The voice continued. For now. Dylan took a deep breath. His options were limited. Going back for help meant leaving Kira alone with whoever that was. And without radio or cell service, it could take hours to reach base. He checked his equipment. Flashlight, bear spray, first aid kit, pocket knife. Not exactly a combat arsenal. 5 seconds or I start having fun with her. Against all protocols and instincts, Dylan approached the door. Hands where I can see them, said the voice when he turned the handle. Dylan entered the cabin and immediately knew he was screwed. The man in front of him was big, about 6'6", defined muscles under a worn military jacket, gray hair cut short, scars on his face, and eyes that Dylan had only seen once before, in a war veteran with severe PTSD, empty eyes that saw people as objects. Kira was tied to a chair in the corner, gagged, but alive. Her eyes widened when she saw Dylan, and she started making desperate sounds through the gag. Forest Ranger Dylan Thorne, said the man, consulting a paper. 5 years of service, tracking specialist, lives alone in a cabin 15 miles from park headquarters. How do you? I do my homework. The man smiled and Dylan felt his stomach turn. You have an interesting reputation. Your colleagues say you find things others can't. Dylan kept his hands visible, studying the cabin. One exit, the door he'd come through. Windows too small for quick escape, and the man was strategically positioned between him and any escape route. What do you want? Fun. The man moved to a table where Dylan saw equipment that made his blood freeze, knives, ropes, and things he preferred not to identify. You know, I've been hunting people for 3 years. Started in Alaska, then Montana, now here, and I've never had a real challenge. Challenge? You forest rangers are all the same. Follow protocols, call for backup, depend on technology. He picked up a knife and tested the edge against his thumb. But you're different. You see things. Dylan realized where this was going. You want to hunt me. 1 hour head start. You run, I follow. If you can make it to your base, you both live. The man pointed at Kira. If I catch you, well, she'll watch what happens before being next. And if I refuse, then I kill you both now and look for fun somewhere else. The smile widened. But where would be the sport in that? Dylan looked at Kira, who was shaking her head frantically. He could see the terror in her eyes, but also something else. A furious determination that said, Don't die for me. 1 hour? 60 minutes, I'll even give you a watch to keep track. The man threw a digital stopwatch to Dylan. Oh, and Thorne? I disabled your radio last night. And if you're thinking about cell phones, I installed a jammer in the area. Technology is cheating. Dylan caught the stopwatch, his mind racing. 1 hour to cover 15 miles of dense forest to base? Impossible running in a straight line, much less using trails. Unless... Time starts when you leave that door, said the man. And Thorne? Just to be clear, I was Special Forces for 12 years, survived Afghanistan, Iraq, and some places that officially don't exist. You're just a forest ranger who finds footprints. That was the first time Dylan smiled since entering the cabin. Yeah, he said, walking to the door. Just a forest ranger. Dylan left the cabin and immediately started running. Not in panic. Panicked running in the forest was suicide. But with purpose, following a route he'd planned mentally while listening to the ex-soldier brag. The guy had made a classic mistake, underestimating his opponent. Yes, Dylan was just a forest ranger, but he was a forest ranger who knew every trail, every shortcut, every depression in the terrain within a 30-mile radius. And more importantly, he knew where to find things others couldn't see, like the emergency supply cache hidden in the hollow tree 2 miles from the cabin. Dylan reached the cache in 8 minutes, a time that would have been impossible for any normal person. but Dylan knew a deer trail that cut straight through a hidden valley, reducing the distance by half. Inside the cache, flares, emergency radio, expanded survival kit, and, jackpot, signal pistol with ammunition. The emergency radio worked immediately. Base, this is Dylan Thorne, code red. I have a hostage in extreme danger and need immediate support. Colin's voice came through clear. Dylan, where the hell have you been? We lost contact 3 hours ago. No time to explain. I need you to come to coordinates. Dylan passed along the cabin's location. But don't come directly. The subject is ex-military, dangerous, and hunting people. Hunting? Dylan, are you? He has Kira Velasco as hostage and gave me a 1-hour head start to reach base before killing her. I need you to surround the area but stay hidden until I give the signal. Silence on the other end, then. Jesus Christ, how much time do you have? Dylan checked the stopwatch. 42 minutes. We're coming. 20 minutes to reach the area. Negative. He'll notice if you arrive too early. Wait for my signal. Dylan turned off the radio and looked at the signal pistol. It wasn't a real weapon but could cause serious damage if used correctly. And he had a plan. Instead of continuing toward base, Dylan began heading back to the cabin. The ex-soldier had made 2 mistakes. First, assuming Dylan would follow the game rules. Second, not realizing that someone who found invisible tracks also knew how not to leave tracks. Dylan took 15 minutes to return to the cabin area, moving like Martinez always joked he moved. Like a haunted ghost. Without breaking branches, without leaving marks on the ground, distributing weight so he barely touched the earth. When he reached the cabin, he found exactly what he expected. Empty. The ex-soldier had left to hunt him, leaving Kira alone. Mistake number 3. Dylan entered silently and cut Kira's ropes with his pocket knife. She was still gagged, but her eyes widened with relief when she saw him. Shh, he whispered, removing the gag. He's looking for me in the forest. We have maybe 10 minutes before he realizes something's wrong. How did you get back so fast? She whispered back. I know some trails. Dylan helped her stand. Can you walk? She tested her legs, wincing. I think so. He kept me tied up for hours. Good. We're getting out of here, but not the way he expects. Dylan led Kira to the back of the cabin, where a small window faced the densest part of the forest. He'd noticed it during his earlier reconnaissance, too small for the ex-soldier to use as an escape route, but perfect for them. Through here, he whispered, helping her climb through. There's a trail about 50 yards that way. Follow it downhill until you reach the river, then follow the river downstream. It'll take you to the main trail. What about you? I'm going to make sure he can't follow us. Dylan pulled out the signal pistol and checked the chamber. 1 shot. He'd have to make it count. The sound of branches breaking in the distance made them both freeze. He's coming back, Kira whispered, terror creeping into her voice. Go. Now. Dylan pushed her toward the tree line. When you reach the main trail, head for the parking area. There should be backup there soon. Dylan. Go. Kira disappeared into the forest just as the cabin door opened. Well, the ex-soldier's voice carried through the cabin. Clever little ranger, but not clever enough. Dylan positioned himself behind a large Douglas fir about 30 yards from the cabin. Through the dirty windows, he could see the man's silhouette moving around. Realizing his hostage was gone, the ex-soldier came out of the cabin slowly, rifle in hand. In daylight, Dylan could see him clearly, bigger than he'd seemed inside, with the controlled movements of someone trained to kill. Thorne, the man called. You think you're smart? I've tracked insurgents through mountains in Afghanistan. You're just playing in your backyard. Dylan stayed silent, waiting. The man was arrogant. That would be his downfall. Your little girlfriend is stumbling through the woods right now. How long do you think it'll take me to find her after I'm done with you? The ex-soldier started moving in a search pattern, but Dylan could see the flaw in his technique. He was using military tactics designed for desert and mountain warfare, not Pacific Northwest rainforest. And he was making noise, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. In Dylan's forest, that was like broadcasting his position. Dylan moved silently from tree to tree, circling around until he was behind the man. The signal pistol wasn't accurate beyond close range, but if he could get within 10 feet. "You know what your problem is, Thorne," the ex-soldier called, still searching in the wrong direction. "You think knowing the terrain gives you an advantage, but I've been preparing this area for weeks. I know every trail, every hiding spot." Dylan smiled grimly. The guy knew the official trails, maybe, but did he know about the deer paths, the seasonal water channels, the hidden ravines that only showed up during certain weather conditions? Dylan reached into his pack and pulled out one of the emergency flares. Not the signal pistol, a regular road flare. He lit it and threw it to his left into a thick patch of undergrowth. The bright red light and hissing sound had the desired effect. The ex-soldier spun toward the distraction, rifle raised. "Cute," the man said. But Dylan could hear uncertainty in his voice now. "Textbook misdirection. They teach that in ranger school." While the man focused on the flare, Dylan closed the distance. 10 feet, 8, 6. That's when he stepped on a branch. The ex-soldier spun around with inhuman speed, rifle swinging toward Dylan. But Dylan was already moving, diving to the side as the shot echoed through the forest. Dylan rolled behind a fallen log as another shot splintered bark inches from his head. The signal pistol was in his hand, but he was still too far for an accurate shot. "There you are," the ex-soldier said, advancing slowly. "Thought you could sneak up on me? I've been ambushed by professionals, kid. You're just..." Dylan popped up and fired the signal pistol in one fluid motion. The flare caught the ex-soldier in the chest, and suddenly he was on fire. Not killed. The signal pistol wasn't that powerful, but his jacket was burning and he was screaming, trying to pat out the flames. Dylan didn't waste the opportunity. He vaulted over the log and tackled the man while he was distracted, knocking the rifle away. They went down hard, rolling in the wet leaves and mud. The ex-soldier was bigger and stronger, but Dylan had desperation and the home field advantage. He managed to get behind the man and apply a chokehold he'd learned in ranger training. Not military grade, but effective enough. "Sleep time, asshole," Dylan grunted as the man struggled. It took almost a minute, but eventually the ex-soldier went limp. Dylan zip-tied the man's hands with restraints from his pack and retrieved the rifle. Then he keyed his emergency radio. "Base, this is Dylan. Target secured. Hostage safe. Send medical and law enforcement to my coordinates." "Dylan? Jesus, what happened out there?" "Long story, just get here fast." 20 minutes later, the forest was full of people. Park rangers, local police, EMTs, and even some FBI agents who'd apparently been tracking similar cases across multiple states. Kira was treated for dehydration and minor injuries but was otherwise fine. The ex-soldier, whose name turned out to be Marcus Reed, dishonorably discharged 3 years earlier for psychological issues, was taken into custody. "How did you know to come back?" Kira asked Dylan while the EMTs checked her over. "I didn't know," Dylan admitted. "I just trusted my instincts. Same way I find tracks that others miss. Sometimes you have to stop thinking and start feeling." "The FBI agent said Reed killed at least 6 people across 3 states, Kira said quietly. "If you hadn't..." "But I did," Dylan said firmly. "That's what matters." Later, after the statements and reports and endless questions, Dylan sat alone on a fallen log in the forest, watching the sunset through the trees. Collins found him there. "Hell of a thing," the sergeant said, sitting down beside him. "Reed's been on the FBI's radar for months. They think he's responsible for a dozen disappearances." "And now he's not," Dylan said simply. "You did good out there. Way beyond the call of duty." Dylan was quiet for a long moment. "Sarge, I think I'm done." "Done?" "With this, the forest, the job, all of it." Dylan gestured at the trees around them. "I used to love this place. It felt like home, you know? Like the trees and trails were old friends. And now? Now I know that the worst monsters aren't bears or cougars, they're people. And that changes everything." Collins nodded slowly. "Take some time. Think about it." But Dylan had already decided. 2 weeks later, he submitted his resignation and moved to Texas, where the flat landscape and open skies felt like freedom after years under the forest canopy. He got a job with a search and rescue organization, using his tracking skills to find missing kids and lost hikers. It was different work, usually positive outcomes, grateful families, hope instead of fear. Sometimes, late at night in his Austin apartment, Dylan would dream about the Olympic forest. But they weren't nightmares anymore. In the dreams, he was walking the trails again, reading the stories written in footprints and broken branches. And the forest was whispering its secrets, just to him. Because here's the thing people don't understand about that day. Dylan didn't just survive by outsmarting Reed. He survived by trusting something deeper than training or protocols or equipment. He trusted the connection he'd always had with the natural world, the ability to see what others missed. Reed had been right about one thing. Dylan was different. But he'd been wrong about what that difference meant. Dylan wasn't just someone who found tracks. He was someone who understood that the forest itself was alive, watching, remembering. And sometimes, if you knew how to listen, it would help you. The real lesson wasn't about survival techniques or emergency procedures. It was about trusting your instincts, even when they led you away from the safe, logical choice. Sometimes the right thing to do is the thing that makes no sense to anyone else. Dylan still gets calls from other search and rescue teams, asking for advice on difficult cases. He always helps when he can, sharing what he's learned about reading the landscape and following evidence that seems impossible. And sometimes, when he's tracking a missing person through the Texas hill country, Dylan feels that familiar whisper from the land itself. Different terrain, different climate, but the same ancient conversation between human intuition and natural wisdom. He never returned to Olympic National Park, but he didn't need to. The forest had taught him everything he needed to know about seeing the invisible, trusting the impossible, and finding the lost. Reed got life in prison without parole. Kira recovered completely and went on to win a National Geographic Photography Award for her wildlife work. And Dylan? Dylan learned that sometimes the best way to honor a gift is to use it differently than you planned. If you know someone who works in remote areas, share this story with them. And if you enjoyed this account, subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this one. Because the wilderness is full of wonders and terrors in equal measure, and sometimes the only thing standing between them is someone who knows how to listen to what the land is trying to say. The stopwatch Reed gave Dylan still sits on his desk in Austin. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Time is always running out, but sometimes an hour is enough to change everything. Dylan Thorne now works with the Texas Hill Country Search and Rescue Organization, where his tracking abilities have helped locate over 40 missing persons since 2020. He declined to be interviewed on camera for this story, but provided detailed written testimony that formed the basis of this account. Ethan always thought he knew every inch of that forest, until he found the cabin that didn't exist on any maps, and realized that someone was watching him discover it. The structure was there, half hidden among the giant cedars of Olympic National Park, as if it had sprouted from the earth itself. Dark wood, mossy, with a window that reflected the filtered afternoon light like a dead eye. The problem? Ethan had memorized every building, every trail, every landmark in that sector during his 4 years as a forest ranger, and that cabin definitely wasn't in any records. If you're into this kind of real account, consider subscribing to the channel because there's way more heavy stuff like this. But let's go back to the beginning, because this whole shit started in the morning when Ethan still thought it would just be another case of a lost tourist. Friday, October 18th, 2019. The call came at 7:23 a.m. right when Ethan was finishing his reheated coffee at the park headquarters. Vera Caldwell, 34 years old, freelance photographer from Seattle, didn't show up at her hotel the night before. Her car was still in the Sol Duke Trail parking lot. Another one, Ethan thought, jotting down the details. Washington in autumn was a trap for amateur photographers. The golden light filtered through the canopy, leaves changing colors, morning mist between the trunks. It was beautiful as hell, but also dangerous. People got lost all the time wanting the perfect shot. Ethan pulled up the woman's file. Vera Caldwell, not an amateur, had a respectable portfolio, specialized in wildlife, had photographed in Alaska, Montana, even Canada. Interesting, he murmured. Experienced photographers rarely disappeared like this. The supervisor, Mike Garrett, showed up with a coffee mug and the look of someone who didn't sleep right. Torres, you take this case. Family's been calling since last night. Ethan nodded. It was the kind of work he did well. He had a strange ability to find people. His colleagues always joked, saying he had human GPS or something like that. Ethan knew it was more than that. He could read signs others couldn't see. Footprints in impossible places. Evidence that went unnoticed. An intuition his colleagues attributed to luck, but that Ethan knew was something more. Any additional information? He asked. She was documenting elk behavior in the Salduke region. Took heavy equipment, cameras, telephoto lenses, tripod, and full camping gear. Planned to stay 3 days. Ethan grabbed the radio, emergency backpack, and Jeep keys. Just another routine search. At least that's what he thought. The Salduke parking lot was almost empty when Ethan arrived. Just a few cars from tourists who preferred shorter trails. Vera's blue Honda Civic was exactly where the family had reported, covered with overnight dew. Ethan walked around the car. Nothing out of the ordinary. Equipment locked in the trunk, small bag on the passenger seat. He checked the contents. Wallet, documents, cell phone. The phone was dead. The main Salduke trail was easy, well marked, frequented by families. But Vera hadn't come here to photograph tourist waterfalls. Ethan studied the map. If she was after elk, she probably followed one of the secondary trails leading to grazing areas. That's when he found the first clue. A footprint. Female hiking boot. Size that matched the description. But it wasn't on the main trail. It was on one of the unofficial trails that snaked deeper into the forest. Ethan smiled. There you are. The trail was poorly defined, half covered by dead leaves and fallen branches. Perfect for someone wanting to escape tourists. Ethan started following, marking GPS waypoints as he advanced. The footprints were clear to him. Other forest rangers probably wouldn't even notice. But Ethan saw every depression in the wet earth, every branch broken at the right angle. 40 minutes later, he found the first campsite. The tent was set up in a small protected valley surrounded by giant cedars. Organized, professional. The kind of setup someone experienced would make. Ethan approached slowly, calling her name. Vera? I'm Ethan Torres, forest ranger. Silence. The tent was closed, but there was no movement. Ethan unzipped the entrance and peeked inside. Empty. Sleeping bag arranged, backpack organized, as if she had left for a quick walk and planned to return. But something was wrong. The photo equipment was all there. Expensive cameras, lenses, tripod. No serious photographer would leave without at least one camera. And there was open food. A half-eaten can of tuna, an apple with 2 bites. As if she had been interrupted, Ethan checked the radio. Base, this is Torres, found Vera Caldwell's campsite. She's not here, but equipment is intact. Going to search the area. Copy, Torres. Keep in contact. That's when Ethan noticed the strange footprints. They weren't Vera's. They were bigger, heavier, military boots by the sole pattern. And they circled the campsite, several times, as if someone had been watching from a distance before approaching. Ah, shit, Ethan muttered. This wasn't a routine search anymore. Ethan followed the military footprints deeper into the forest. They alternated with Vera's, sometimes parallel, sometimes overlapping. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone had followed her, and she probably didn't know. The terrain got more difficult as they moved away from the trails. Steep slopes, icy streams, dense vegetation. Ethan had to use all his skill not to lose the track. At some points, the footprints disappeared completely on solid rock or thick moss, but he always managed to find the next sign. A leaf turned the wrong way, a twig broken at the specific angle. Following this trail, he reached a clearing that shouldn't exist. It was small, circular, surrounded by trees that seemed to have been deliberately arranged. In the center, remains of a recent fire, and scattered around, personal belongings, a wallet, a women's shoe, a torn blouse. Ethan felt his stomach turn. They weren't Vera's. They were old things, discolored by time. How many people had passed through here? He photographed everything with his cell phone, marked the GPS location, and continued following the trail. The footprints left the clearing heading north, climbing a steep slope covered with ferns. It was at the top of this slope that Ethan saw the cabin. The structure didn't make sense. It was there, solid and real, as if it had always existed, but Ethan knew that sector like the back of his hand. He had walked these trails dozens of times in the last 4 years. There was no historical structure registered in this area. The cabin was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, made of dark logs covered with moss, rusty metal roof. A single window with mirrored glass that didn't let you see inside. The door was ajar. Ethan stopped about 20 meters away, observing. Something was fundamentally wrong there. The feeling of being watched was almost physical, as if someone was aiming at him from behind. He pulled out the radio. "Base, this is Torres. Found an unmapped structure at coordinates." He rattled off the GPS numbers. "Going to investigate, but I need backup." Static. Then Mike's distorted voice. "Torres, not receiving, well, repeat." Ethan checked the radio. Weak signal, but it should work. "Base, repeat. Found unauthorized structure, requesting backup." More static. Then silence. "Great," he muttered. "Exactly what I needed." Ethan approached the cabin slowly, hand resting on his service weapon. Every instinct screamed that he should wait for backup, but Vera could be in there, could be hurt, could be. The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside was darker than it should be for mid-afternoon. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust. The cabin was bigger inside than it looked from outside. One room, but organized like a military command post. Maps on the walls, photos, and in the center, a table covered with surveillance equipment. But what made Ethan's blood freeze were the photos. They were all of Vera. Dozens of them. Vera setting up camp. Vera taking pictures. Vera eating. Vera sleeping. All taken with a telephoto lens from a distance. Some had dates, they went back 3 days. Someone had been stalking her since she arrived. "Son of a bitch," Ethan whispered. That's when he heard the voice behind him. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Ethan spun around, hand going to his weapon, but froze when he saw the man in the doorway. Tall, maybe 6'2", wearing full camouflage gear that looked military grade, face painted with woodland camo, and pointing an assault rifle directly at Ethan's chest. "Easy there, Ranger boy," the man said, voice calm and controlled. "No sudden movements. You wouldn't want to end up like your photographer friend." "Where is she?" Ethan demanded, slowly raising his hands. The man smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "She's around, having a little lesson in wilderness survival. Advanced course, you might say." Ethan studied the man. Everything about him screamed military. Posture, gear, the way he held the weapon. But there was something off. The smile was too wide. The eyes had that 1,000-yard stare that never quite focused. "What do you want?" Ethan asked. "What I want." The man laughed. "I want what I've always wanted. A proper hunt. You civilians come out here thinking you know the wilderness, thinking you're safe. But you have no idea what real predators look like. You're hunting people. I'm providing education, Darwin's education. Only the strong survive, Ranger boy. Your little photographer. She lasted longer than most. 2 days of good hunting before she made a mistake." Ethan felt sick. "Is she alive?" "For now. Depends on how entertaining you turn out to be." The man gestured with the rifle, moved to the back wall slowly. Ethan complied, mind racing. The man was obviously experienced, but he had one advantage. He was underestimating Ethan, treating him like another soft civilian. He had no idea about Ethan's tracking abilities, his experience reading the forest. "You know what your problem is?" the man continued, following Ethan with the rifle. You people think the Forest Service uniform makes you some kind of wilderness expert, but you're just another government employee. Soft, weak. And you're what exactly? Ethan asked, stalling for time while scanning the cabin for anything useful. Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan, real combat, real hunting. But when I came back, the man's expression darkened. Everything was soft, weak. So I decided to bring a little real-world education to the wilderness. Ethan noticed something on the table, a detailed map with marked locations, red X's scattered throughout the Olympic Peninsula. Too many X's. How many? He asked quietly. How many what? How many people have you educated? The man's smile returned. Enough to know that you ranger types always make the same mistakes. Predictable. Following protocol instead of instinct. Your friend Vera? She was predictable too. Took photos in the same spots every day. Set up camp in the most obvious location. Made it almost too easy. That's when Ethan realized the man's fatal flaw. He was arrogant, overconfident, and he had just revealed exactly where Vera was. You know what? Ethan said, meeting the man's eyes. You're right. I am just a government employee. Probably couldn't track an elephant in fresh snow. The man laughed. At least you're honest about it. But here's the thing, Ethan continued, slowly shifting his weight. I found you. The man's expression flickered for just a moment. What? Your cabin. Your little hunting ground. Your surveillance photos. I found all of it. Ethan smiled coldly. And if I can find you, others can too. For the first time, uncertainty crossed the man's face. You got lucky. Did I? Or maybe you're not as good as you think you are. The rifle wavered slightly. Shut up. I'm just wondering, Ethan pressed. How many people have walked right past your little hidey hole without you even knowing? How many times have you been the one being watched? I said shut up. The man's voice rose. That's when Ethan moved. He dove left behind the table as the rifle cracked. The bullet splintered wood where his head had been a second before. Ethan rolled, grabbed the heavy map case from the table, and hurled it at the man's face. The case connected, sending the man stumbling backward. Ethan was already moving, charging low, tackling the man around the waist. They crashed through the doorway onto the mossy ground outside. The rifle went flying. Both men scrambled for it, but Ethan was faster. He grabbed the weapon and rolled away, coming up with it trained on the man. Don't fucking move, Ethan panted. The man slowly raised his hands, but he was still smiling. You think you've won, Ranger Boy? I think you're going to tell me where Vera is, right now. And then what? You arrest me? Take me back to your little ranger station? The man laughed. You have no idea how deep this goes. How many others there are like me. Ethan felt a chill. Others? You think I'm the only one who figured it out? The only one who came back from the wars and realized what America really needed? The man's eyes were bright with fanaticism. There's a whole network of us, veterans who understand what real survival looks like. Bullshit. Is it? How do you think I knew about your photographer friend? Someone told me she was coming. Someone with access to park permits. Someone on the inside. Ethan's mind raced. If the man was telling the truth. Where is Vera? Follow the stream behind the cabin. Half-mile downstream. There's a cave system. But Ranger Boy? The man's smile turned predatory. Even if you find her, even if you get her out, we'll find you. Both of you. This forest is our territory now. Ethan kept the rifle trained on the man while reaching for his radio. Still static. The man noticed and laughed. Signal jammer. Military grade. But don't worry. It only covers about a 2-mile radius. Get up, Ethan ordered. You're coming with me. Am I? The man's hand moved slightly toward his belt. Ethan saw the movement and fired a warning shot into the ground. Next one goes in your leg. The man raised his hands again, still smiling. Okay. You win this round. But as they moved toward the stream, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being played, that this was exactly what the man wanted. The stream behind the cabin was ice cold, fed by mountain runoff. Ethan forced the man to walk ahead of him, rifle ready. The sound of rushing water covered their footsteps, but it also masked any other sounds in the forest. "There," the man said after they'd walked for about 10 minutes. He pointed to a dark opening in a rocky outcrop. "Cave entrance, your photographer friend is in there." Ethan studied the entrance. It was partially hidden by fallen logs and overgrown vegetation, the perfect place to hide someone. "Go in first." "Oh, I don't think so, Ranger boy. That cave system goes back pretty far. Lots of places to get turned around. Lots of places for accidents to happen." The man's tone was casual, conversational. "But here's what I'll do for you. I'll wait out here while you go get her. Professional courtesy." "Like hell." "Think about it," the man said reasonably. "She's been in there for hours, maybe injured, maybe hypothermic. You waste time arguing with me, and she might not make it out alive." Ethan felt the weight of the decision. Every minute he delayed could be critical for Vera, but leaving the man loose was asking for trouble. "Here's another option," the man continued. "You could just shoot me, right now. Put a bullet in my head and solve all your problems." He spread his arms wide. "Go ahead. I'm unarmed." Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. The smart tactical decision would be exactly that. The man was clearly dangerous, possibly part of a larger network. Keeping him alive was a risk, but Ethan wasn't a killer. "Turn around," he ordered, "hands behind your back." "You got zip ties, Ranger boy?" Ethan realized he didn't. Standard Ranger gear didn't include restraints. He could try to tie the man up with rope, but that would take time and require him to get close. "Tell you what," the man said, as if reading his thoughts. "I'll make this easy for you. I'll just sit right here by this tree and wait. Scout's honor." "You're not a Boy Scout." "Marine's honor, then." Ethan made his decision. He backed toward the cave entrance, keeping the rifle trained on the man. "If you move from that spot, I will shoot you." "Wouldn't dream of it," the man said, settling down against a large cedar. "Take your time, I'll be right here." Ethan reached the cave entrance and paused. Everything about this felt like a trap. But Vera was in there. He pulled out his flashlight and entered the cave. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside. The entrance tunnel opened into a chamber about the size of a small room. Ethan's flashlight beam swept the walls, looking for any sign of Vera. "Vera," he called. "It's Ethan Torres, Forest Ranger." A weak voice answered from deeper in the cave. "Here. I'm here." Ethan followed the sound through a narrow passage that opened into another chamber. His flashlight found her huddled against the far wall, hands zip-tied behind her back, ankles bound. She was alive, but pale and shivering. "Jesus, Vera. Are you hurt?" "Sprained ankle. Cold. Been here since... What day is it?" "Friday afternoon. Let me get you out of these." Ethan cut the zip ties with his multi-tool. Vera's hands were purple with cold. "The man who took me," she whispered. "He's military. Said he was hunting me. Like a game." "I know, I've got him outside." Ethan helped her to her feet. She could barely put weight on the injured ankle. "Can you walk?" "I think so." Slowly. They made their way back through the cave system. Ethan's mind was racing, trying to figure out the safest way to get Vera out of there and back to civilization. With her injured ankle, it would be slow going, and the man's talk about a network had him spooked. They reached the entrance tunnel. Ethan could see daylight ahead. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Vera. He emerged from the cave, rifle ready. The spot where he'd left the man was empty. "Shit," Ethan muttered, scanning the forest. The man could be anywhere now. Could be watching them through a scope right now. "He's gone?" Vera asked. "Yeah, and we need to move, fast." But as they started along the stream back toward the cabin, Ethan heard something that made his blood freeze. Radio chatter. Clear, professional military communications. And it was close. "Base team, this is Hunter 1. Package is mobile. Repeat, package is mobile." "Copy, Hunter 1. Units 2 and 3 are in position. Ethan grabbed Vera and pulled her behind a large boulder. There were more of them. The man hadn't been lying about the network. "What is it?" Vera whispered. "We're fucked," Ethan said simply. "There's more than one of them." Ethan's mind raced through their options. Going back to the cabin was out. They'd expect that. Following the stream would keep them in the open. The main trail was too far away, and with Vera's ankle they'd never make it before being caught. But Ethan had one advantage these military hunters didn't expect. He knew this forest better than they did, and his ability to read terrain and find hidden paths was about to be put to the ultimate test. "Can you climb?" he whispered to Vera. She looked at the steep, rocky slope behind them. "With this ankle?" "Not up, down. There's a drainage ravine about 50 yards from here. It connects to the main stream system, but it's hidden from above. These guys are thinking like military. They'll expect us to take the obvious routes." More radio chatter echoed through the trees. They were closing in. "Move," Ethan whispered. He helped Vera along the base of the rocky outcrop, staying low, using every bit of cover. His ability to read the landscape was in overdrive now, finding the subtle paths that wouldn't be visible to someone just scanning with binoculars. The drainage ravine was exactly where he remembered it. A narrow cut in the rock, maybe 4 feet wide, with a small stream running through it. It was steep, but manageable. "Down here," he whispered, helping Vera into the ravine. They descended carefully, using tree roots and rock ledges for handholds. The sound of water covered their movement. Above them, Ethan could hear voices, multiple men coordinating a search pattern. "Hunter 2, check the cave system." "Copy. Hunter 3, take the north perimeter." "Roger that." They were professional, organized, but they were also overconfident, just like their leader. The ravine leveled out after about 100 yards, joining a larger stream that Ethan recognized. This one would take them back toward the official trail system, and more importantly, toward the ranger station. "How far?" Vera whispered. She was struggling with the ankle but pushing through. 2 miles to the main trail, then another mile to my jeep." Ethan checked his watch. "We can do this." They followed the stream, staying in the water to avoid leaving tracks. It was cold as hell, but it would make them harder to follow. Ethan used every trick he'd learned, watching for the subtle signs that would tell him if anyone was ahead of them, reading the forest for the safest paths. An hour later, they reached the main trail. Ethan had never been so happy to see that familiar wooden trail marker. They were back in the official park system, back where other people might be around. "Almost there," he told Vera. That's when they heard the helicopter. The helicopter was military surplus, painted in woodland camo. It appeared over the tree line just as Ethan and Vera reached the parking lot. The sound of rotors filled the air as it circled overhead. "Run," Ethan said. They sprinted toward his jeep, Vera limping but keeping up. The helicopter was landing in the parking lot, blocking their escape route. Armed men jumped out before the skids even touched the ground. Ethan pulled Vera behind a large boulder at the edge of the parking area. They were trapped. The helicopter had cut off their escape, and he could hear more men approaching through the forest behind them. "End of the line, Ranger boy." The familiar voice of the first hunter echoed across the parking lot. "Come out and make this easy on yourself." Ethan checked his rifle. Half a magazine left. Against a helicopter and multiple armed men, it wasn't much. But he had to try. "Stay here," he whispered to Vera. "Whatever happens, stay down." "What are you doing?" "Something stupid." Ethan stood up from behind the boulder, rifle raised. The helicopter was about 50 yards away, rotors still spinning. He could see the pilot and at least 3 men on the ground. "You want me?" he shouted. "Come and get me." He opened fire, aiming for the helicopter's tail rotor. The distance was long for accurate rifle fire, but Ethan had spent plenty of time at the range. His shots sparked off the aircraft's hull. The men on the ground scattered, taking cover behind vehicles. Return fire came immediately. professional, disciplined burst that forced Ethan back behind the boulder. But his gamble paid off. The helicopter pulled away, gaining altitude. The pilot wasn't willing to risk more damage to his aircraft. "Smart move, Ranger boy," the leader's voice called out. "But you're still outnumbered." Ethan reloaded his last magazine. He was down to 30 rounds against at least 4 men. The math wasn't good. That's when he heard something that changed everything. Sirens. Real sirens. Police cars approaching fast along the park access road. "What the hell?" one of the hunters shouted. Ethan smiled grimly. His radio might have been jammed, but Vera's cell phone apparently wasn't. She must have called for help while they were in the ravine. "Vera," he called softly, "please tell me you called 911. 20 minutes ago," she replied. "And the FBI, and the state police, and probably some other people." The hunters were pulling back, retreating toward the tree line. The helicopter was already disappearing over the ridge. Whatever their network was, they apparently weren't ready for a full law enforcement response. "This isn't over, Ranger boy," the leader shouted as he vanished into the forest. "We know who you are now." But Ethan was already thinking ahead. If there really was a network of these guys, if they really had someone on the inside providing information, then this was just the beginning. The first police car screamed into the parking lot, followed by 2 more. Federal agents weren't far behind. As the chaos of the response unfolded around them, Ethan helped Vera to the ambulance that had somehow also appeared. "You saved my life," she said as the EMTs checked her over. "We saved each other," Ethan replied. But privately, he was thinking about what the leader had said. About networks. About insiders. About how many other people might be out there in America's wilderness, being hunted by men who thought they were playing some kind of twisted survival game. 6 months later, Ethan was living in a small town outside Austin, Texas. The heat was a constant presence, dry and relentless, nothing like the cool dampness of the Olympic Peninsula. He'd traded his forest ranger uniform for civilian clothes and a job with a private security company that specialized in wilderness survival training. The official investigation had been extensive. The FBI had found evidence of at least 12 other victims across multiple national parks. The network was real, a loose organization of military veterans who had convinced themselves that they were providing some kind of public service by culling the weak from America's wilderness areas. They'd caught 3 of them, including the leader, whose name turned out to be Marcus Webb, former Marine sniper with 2 tours in Afghanistan and a dishonorable discharge for excessive violence. But the others had vanished, along with any evidence of who their inside contact might have been. Ethan's phone rang. It was Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI task force. "We found another one," she said without preamble. "Where?" "Yellowstone. Same pattern. Solo hiker goes missing, found 3 days later in a cave system. But this time we got lucky." "How so?" "The victim was a former Army Ranger. Guy fought back, wounded his attacker before getting captured." Agent Chen paused. "He's alive, Ethan, and he ID'd his attacker. We think it's one of the ones from your case." Ethan felt that familiar pull, the same instinct that had led him to become a ranger in the first place, the need to help people who were lost in the wilderness, whether literally or figuratively. "You want me to consult," he said. "I want you to do what you do best. Find the unfindable." Ethan looked out the window of his Austin apartment at the flat, hot landscape that was so different from Washington's mountains. He'd come here to escape, to start over. But maybe running wasn't the answer. "Send me the files," he said. After he hung up, Ethan thought about Vera. She'd gone back to photography, but now she focused on urban environments instead of wilderness. The experience had changed her, just like it had changed him. But she'd found a way to keep doing what she loved. Maybe it was time for him to do the same. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We know where you are, Ranger boy. Texas is nice this time of year." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment. Then he deleted it and started packing. Some hunts never really end. but that doesn't mean you stop fighting. He was heading back to where he belonged, in the wilderness, using his gift for finding the unfindable to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The network might still be out there, but now Ethan had a network too. Federal agents, local law enforcement, and other survivors who understood what they were up against. 3 days later, Ethan was standing at the edge of Yellowstone's Lamar Valley, breathing the thin mountain air and feeling more like himself than he had in months. Agent Chen stood beside him, reviewing the case files. "You really think you can track this guy?" she asked. Ethan smiled, studying the landscape with eyes that saw things others missed. "Agent Chen, I found a cabin that didn't exist on any map in one of the most surveyed forests in America, finding one asshole with a god complex." He shouldered his pack and started across the valley, already reading the subtle signs in the grass and soil that would lead him to his quarry. "That's what I do. If you know someone who works in remote areas, share this story. And if you like this account, hit subscribe because there are way more real stories like this one that need to be told." Marcus's flashlight flickered and died exactly when he needed it most. "Son of a bitch," he whispered, trying not to make any noise. 6 hours earlier, he was sure he knew what he was doing. Now, crouched behind a massive cedar in Olympic National Park, with something moving through the trees behind him, Marcus wondered how the hell he'd gotten to this point. The irony wasn't lost on him. A guy who'd moved from the scorching heat of Texas to the perpetually damp forests of Washington, only to find himself sweating bullets in 30-degree weather. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more accounts like this one. Let's go back to the beginning. It was October 2019, and Marcus still believed that 5 years as a forest ranger in Olympic National Park had prepared him for anything. What a complete fucking joke that turned out to be. He'd gotten the call about Kira Blackwood on a gray Tuesday that felt like every other gray Tuesday in western Washington, that perpetual drizzle that made him miss the brutal honesty of Texas heat. Wildlife photographer, 24 years old, specialized in documenting elk migration. Last seen near the Hoh River Trail 3 days ago. Probably another city girl who thought Instagram likes were worth dying for, Marcus had muttered to his partner Rodriguez that morning. "Remember that influencer last month who got lost trying to get the perfect sunrise shot?" Rodriguez laughed. "Yeah, the one who called 911 because her phone died and she couldn't find her way back to her car that was literally 50 yards away." Marcus had been a rookie ranger for just 18 months when he first discovered his weird talent. He'd been tracking a lost hiker near Lake Crescent when he found footprints that everyone else swore weren't there. Not just couldn't see them, literally claimed the ground was empty. But Marcus could trace every step, could tell the person's approximate weight, their gait, even their emotional state from how deep their heel strikes were. It freaked out the veteran rangers so much they started calling him Bloodhound Delacra. The ability had only gotten stronger over the years. Marcus could read a forest floor like other people read newspapers. Broken twigs told stories, disturbed moss revealed secrets, and footprints. Footprints were like fingerprints to him. Unique, telling, impossible to fake if you knew what to look for. But when Marcus reached Kira's last known coordinates, something felt wrong immediately. Not wrong like bad weather coming wrong. Wrong like apex predator nearby wrong. The forest was too quiet. In 5 years of working these trails, Marcus had never heard silence this complete. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals, no insects. Even the ever-present Pacific Northwest wind seemed to have stopped moving through the trees. Probably another Instagram photographer who bit off more than she could chew, Marcus had told his supervisor, Sarah Chen, over the radio that morning. These wildlife photography types always think they're the next Ansel Adams until they realize bears don't care about their artistic vision. Sarah's voice crackled through the static. "Just find her, Marcus. Her parents are flying in from New York tomorrow, and they're the kind of people who sue first and ask questions later." How spectacularly wrong he was about everything. The first clue that something didn't add up came when Marcus found Kira's campsite. The orange dome tent was still perfectly set up, not a single guy line out of place. Her expensive camera equipment, easily $5,000 worth of cannon gear, was scattered on the ground like she'd dropped everything and run. But here's what made Marcus's skin crawl. There were no footprints. None. Not around the tent, not leading away from it, not even the ones that should have been there from when she'd initially set up camp. And that was impossible. Marcus had been tracking in Olympic National Park for 5 years, and before that, he'd grown up hunting in the East Texas pine forests with his grandfather. The man who'd taught him that every step tells a story, every broken twig has meaning, and the forest never lies. People do, animals do, but the ground always tells the truth. Marcus knelt down and examined the area with the methodical precision that had made him legendary among Pacific Northwest rangers. He could see things others missed, the way pine needles compressed under different weights, how moss recovered from being stepped on, the microscopic scratches on rocks that indicated direction of travel. It was almost supernatural, this ability. His fellow rangers had started calling him Eagle Eye after he'd tracked a lost child through terrain that 3 other search teams had declared impossible to follow. But here, around Kira's campsite, the forest floor looked like someone had taken a giant eraser to it. The ground was too perfect, too undisturbed. Someone with serious skills had deliberately cleaned the area of any evidence. And that's when Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was one set of footprints, his own, from when he'd arrived. Someone had been watching him discover the scene. Someone with the patience to wait until Marcus had contaminated the area with his own tracks, then systematically erased everything else, leaving only Marcus's footprints as evidence that anyone had been there. The radio crackled with Sarah's voice. "Base to Delacra. What's your status?" "Found the campsite. This isn't right, Sarah. Someone's been here after she disappeared. Someone who knows how to cover tracks better than anyone I've ever seen." "Better than you?" Sarah sounded skeptical. In 5 years, Marcus had never failed to find a trail. "Yeah, better than me." The admission tasted like copper in his mouth. "I'm sending backup." "Negative. Teams stretched thin with that fire in Sector 7. I can handle this, but I need you to contact the sheriff's department. This might be more than a missing person." "Copy that. Maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. But 30 minutes later, Marcus's radio decided to have other plans. The first time it happened, Marcus thought it was just the Olympic Mountains being their usual pain-in-the-ass selves when it came to radio communication. The peaks and valleys created dead zones that could cut off transmission without warning. But when he climbed to higher ground, a rocky outcrop that should have given him a clear line of sight to the nearest relay tower, the radio still produced nothing but static. He tried cycling through all the emergency frequencies. Nothing. Changed batteries with the spares from his pack. Still nothing. Even the emergency beacon that was supposed to work in any conditions was completely silent. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, staring at equipment that had never failed him before. That's when he found the first real footprint. Not Kira's. He'd seen photos of her hiking boots, and this was definitely not a match. Military-style boot, size 12, with a distinctive sole pattern that Marcus recognized from his time training with ex-military rangers. Vibram Arctic grip sole, the kind used by special forces for operations in rough terrain. The print was pressed deep into the soft earth near a creek bed, where the person hadn't been able to erase it completely, and it was fresh. Maybe 2 hours old, based on how the edges hadn't started to crumble yet. Marcus felt every instinct he'd developed over 5 years in the forest screaming at him. This wasn't random. This wasn't some lost hiker stumbling around. Someone with serious training was out here. Someone who'd taken Kira, and now that same someone was playing games with the ranger sent to find her. He started following the military boot tracks, his exceptional abilities kicking into overdrive. Most people looked at a forest floor and saw dirt, leaves, and rocks. Marcus saw a story written in the smallest details, the way certain twigs were broken at precise angles, indicating someone had moved through here deliberately, but carefully. Scratches on tree bark that formed an almost invisible trail marker system. Moss disturbed in patterns that looked random but weren't. This person was good. Really good. But they weren't dealing with an ordinary ranger. Marcus had been tracking for 3 hours when he found the first piece of evidence that made his stomach drop. A section of Kira's jacket, torn and bloody, hanging from a branch at eye level. It was placed deliberately, positioned exactly where someone following the trail would spot it immediately. "Son of a bitch," he said out loud, and immediately regretted making any noise. Because that's when he heard it. A low, deliberate whistle echoing through the trees. Not the kind of whistle someone makes absent-mindedly. This was purposeful, mocking, the kind of sound a predator makes when it knows it has cornered its prey. Then came the voice, distorted by distance but clear enough to understand. "Getting warmer, Ranger boy, but not warm enough." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. This was a hunt, and he was the target. Marcus started moving faster, using every stealth technique he'd learned during ranger training and picked up from his grandfather's hunting lessons. Move with the wind, step on rocks when possible, avoid breaking twigs. But whoever was out there seemed to anticipate his every move. When Marcus tried to circle north around a dense thicket, the whistle came from the north. When he doubled back toward the creek, the whistle echoed from that direction too. It was like his hunter had multiple positions, or worse, like there was more than one person. But Marcus's tracking abilities were telling him something different. The footprint patterns, the broken vegetation, the barely visible trail signs, they all pointed to a single individual. Someone who was impossibly good at moving through forest terrain and had obviously spent time learning the specific geography of this area. That's when his equipment really started failing in ways that defied explanation. First, his backup flashlight, the one he'd tested that morning and knew had fresh batteries, flickered and died. Then, his emergency GPS unit started giving readings that were obviously wrong, showing his position as being 3 miles north of where he actually was. His compass began spinning like a carnival ride, unable to find magnetic north. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus muttered, checking device after device. His cell phone, which had been showing 0 bars since the radio failed, was now displaying full signal strength but couldn't complete any calls. When he tried to dial 911, the call would connect, ring once, then disconnect. He tried texting Sarah. The message showed as delivered, but he knew damn well there was no cell tower coverage in this part of the park. The psychological games were just beginning. Marcus found a trail marker, one of the standard Park Service signs that marked the main hiking route. Except this one had been modified. Someone had carved additional text into the wood. "Monsieur Delacra, Ranger, 2847, welcome to the game." His badge number, his full name, information that wasn't public record. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. This psychopath had been planning this specifically for him. Over the next 2 hours, the mind games escalated in ways that made Marcus question his own sanity. He'd find personal items that couldn't possibly be there, a photo of his family back in Longview, Texas, pinned to a tree with a hunting knife. His own ranger hat, the one he'd lost 6 months ago during a search operation, hanging from a branch with a note. "You're not as careful as you think." But the audio manipulation was the worst part. Kira's voice calling for help from different directions, echoing through the trees with perfect clarity. Except Marcus was becoming increasingly certain that Kira was dead, and what he was hearing were recordings being played through speakers hidden throughout the forest. "Help me, Marcus, I'm trapped over here." The voice came from his left, desperate and terrified. Then, 30 seconds later, from his right. "No, Marcus, I'm here, please, he's coming back." The bastard had obviously recorded Kira before killing her, probably during torture sessions designed to capture her voice in various states of terror. Using a dead woman's screams to psychologically torment her would-be rescuer was a level of sadistic planning that made Marcus's skin crawl. "I know what you're doing, you sick fuck," Marcus shouted into the trees. "She's already dead, isn't she?" Laughter echoed from multiple directions. Then that voice again. "Smart boy, but not smart enough. See, the game's not about her anymore. It's about you. About seeing how long it takes before you break. Who are you? What do you want?" "I want to see if the famous Marcus Delacroix is as good as everyone says. The ranger who can track a shadow through concrete." The guy who found that lost kid last year when the FBI's best trackers gave up. I want to know if you're really that good, or if it's all just reputation. That's when Marcus realized this wasn't random. Someone had been studying him, learning about his cases, his abilities, his methods. This was personal in a way that terrified him more than any immediate physical threat. The hunter continued. See, I've been operating in these mountains for 3 years now. Hikers, photographers, even a couple of your fellow rangers. They all thought they were smarter than the forest. They all thought their technology and training would save them. Marcus felt sick. How many? Enough to get bored with easy prey. That's why I needed someone special. Someone who might actually provide a challenge. You're insane. I'm efficient and patient. I've been watching you for 6 months, Delacroix. Learning your patterns, your techniques, your weaknesses. Did you know you always check your compass 3 times when you're uncertain about direction? Did you know you have a tell when you're lying? You touch your radio even when it's not clipped to your vest? Marcus unconsciously looked down at his hand, which was indeed hovering near where his radio usually sat. See? Predictable, just like all the others. But that's where the hunter made his first mistake. He assumed Marcus would react like his previous victims. He assumed fear would make the ranger sloppy, desperate, easy to manipulate. Instead, Marcus did what 5 years of forest emergencies had trained him to do. He got angry. Not panicked angry. Coldly, methodically angry. The kind of anger that sharpens focus instead of clouding it. All right, asshole, Marcus said quietly. You want to play games? Let's play. He stopped trying to escape and started hunting back. Marcus began using his exceptional tracking abilities not to follow his hunter, but to analyze the entire tactical situation. This guy might have military training and high-tech equipment, but Marcus had something better. He could read the forest in ways that no amount of technology could replicate. He started mapping the psychological attacks in his mind, the locations where equipment had failed, where voices had come from, where personal items had been planted. They formed a pattern. His hunter was hurting him, using fear and confusion to drive him toward something. Probably a kill zone where the final game would be played. But there was something the hunter didn't know about Marcus's abilities. He could track backwards through time, reading signs that had been deliberately obscured. While following the obvious trail would lead him into a trap, Marcus could find the real movements, the actual path his hunter had taken to set up all these psychological games. He knelt down and examined areas that looked completely undisturbed to normal eyes. But Marcus could see the microscopic signs of passage, pine needles compressed in ways that looked natural, but followed too perfect a pattern, moss that had been carefully replaced after being disturbed, scratches on bark that formed an almost invisible navigation system. The hunter had been thorough, but not thorough enough to fool someone with Marcus's level of skill. Over the next hour, Marcus systematically backtracked the real trail while his hunter continued playing psychological games with speakers and planted evidence. The hunter thought Marcus was still being driven toward the trap, but Marcus was actually circling around to find the source. And that's when he discovered the base camp. Hidden in a natural depression and covered with military-grade camouflage netting was the most sophisticated operation Marcus had ever seen outside of a movie. Multiple surveillance monitors showing camera feeds from throughout the forest, electronic jamming equipment that explained the equipment failures, and a collection of personal items that told a horrifying story. Wallets, driver's licenses, and photographs from at least a dozen different victims. Some Marcus recognized from missing person cases that had been written off as hiking accidents or people who'd simply vanished in the wilderness. Others were completely unknown, suggesting the scope of this operation was far larger than anyone had imagined. But the centerpiece of the camp was a board covered with photographs, surveillance photos of potential targets, all marked with detailed notes about their habits, abilities, and psychological profiles. And there, in the center, was the entire section dedicated to Marcus himself. Photos taken with a telephoto lens over several months, showing him at work, at home, even at the grocery store in Port Angeles. Notes were written in precise military handwriting. Subject shows exceptional tracking abilities, requires specialized approach. Previous victims' methods will not be sufficient. Plan accordingly. And there, tied to a tree at the edge of the camp, was Kira Blackwood. Alive, but obviously terrorized and exhausted. Duct tape over her mouth, zip ties around her wrists and ankles. Her eyes went wide when she saw Marcus, but he held a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. Because he could hear footsteps approaching through the forest. "You know?" came that familiar voice, much closer now. "I really thought you'd be more challenging. All those stories about your abilities, and you walked right into the same trap as everyone else." Marcus pressed himself against a large cedar and controlled his breathing. His hunter was returning to base camp, probably expecting to find Marcus stumbling around in circles, terrified and lost. The man who emerged from the tree line was exactly what Marcus had expected. Mid-40s, built like someone who'd spent years in special forces, moving with the controlled precision of professional military training. But there was something else, an arrogance in his posture that suggested he'd been playing this game so long he'd started to believe his own hype about being unstoppable. "Time to end this little chase, Ranger boy," the man said, checking his surveillance monitors. "According to my cameras, you should be... Wait, where the hell are you?" The monitors showed empty forest where Marcus should have been. His hunter started cycling through different camera angles, confusion replacing confidence. "That's impossible, you can't just disappear." But Marcus hadn't disappeared. He'd done something his hunter's military training hadn't prepared him for. He'd used the forest itself to become invisible. Years of tracking animals had taught him how to move like prey when necessary, how to use natural cover and ambient noise to mask his presence. His hunter made the fatal mistake of underestimating him. "Marcus!" the man called out, abandoning stealth for the first time. "I know you're here somewhere. Come out and let's finish this properly, man to man." Instead of responding, Marcus used his tracking abilities to analyze his opponent's position and movement patterns. The way the man stepped, the directions he looked, the timing of his movements, everything told Marcus exactly where his hunter's attention was focused and when he'd be vulnerable. Marcus moved like smoke through the forest, using every shadow and natural depression to remain undetected. His hunter might have superior weapons and equipment, but Marcus had home field advantage and skills that couldn't be jammed or hacked. When he was finally in position, Marcus used the forest itself as a weapon. He'd noticed something while analyzing the camp that his hunter had missed in his arrogance. The electronic equipment was positioned too close to natural fire hazards, dry kindling, pine needles, and low-hanging branches that would catch fire quickly in the right conditions. Marcus had learned forest fire behavior during his 5 years as a ranger. He knew exactly how flames would spread in these conditions, how smoke would move, and how fire could be used tactically. His emergency flare gun had been one of the few pieces of equipment that hadn't been jammed. Military electronic jammers were designed to disrupt communication and navigation, not emergency pyrotechnics. "Looking for someone?" Marcus said from behind his hunter. The man spun around, rifle raised, but Marcus was already moving. The flare struck the kindling pile near the electronic equipment, and the forest fire training that had been drilled into every ranger kicked in. In seconds, the hunter's entire technological advantage was engulfed in flames. Surveillance cameras melted, jamming equipment sparked and died, and the forest itself became Marcus's ally. The hunter fired blindly through the smoke, shouting threats and curses. But Marcus was no longer where the muzzle flashes were aimed. 5 years of wildfire fighting had taught him how to move through smoke and flame, how to use fire as concealment rather than obstacle. The fight that followed was brutal but brief. The hunter was skilled, trained, and desperate. But he'd made the critical error of believing his own propaganda about superiority. He'd expected a panicked ranger running through the woods like a hunted animal. Instead, he got someone who'd turned the forest into his personal weapon system. When it was over, Marcus zip-tied the unconscious hunter with the man's own restraints and freed Kira, who was traumatized but physically unharmed. "Is he dead?" she asked through tears, her voice hoarse from screaming. "No," Marcus said, checking her bindings. "But he's going to have a very long time to think about his life choices." The hike back to civilization took 8 hours. Once they got far enough from the jamming equipment, Marcus's radio mysteriously started working again. The hunter identified himself as Dale Thornton, former Special Forces who'd been dishonorably discharged for psychological issues and conduct unbecoming. But the investigation that followed revealed something that still gives Marcus nightmares. Thornton's operation wasn't limited to Olympic National Park. Evidence in the camp linked him to at least 15 disappearances across 6 different national parks over 4 years. And there were indications he wasn't working alone. Maps marked other potential hunting grounds, communication logs with encrypted contacts, references to regional coordinators and target sharing. Thornton had been part of a network of predators using America's national park system as their personal hunting preserve, targeting people whose disappearances would be written off as hiking accidents. The FBI task force that took over the case found evidence of similar operations in Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, and Great Smoky Mountains. But Thornton never gave up his contacts, and the investigation hit walls that suggested the network had connections to people with serious resources and influence. Marcus quit the Forest Service 2 weeks after the FBI finished debriefing him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 5 years in the perpetually damp forests of Washington state, only to flee back to the honest heat of Texas after learning how predatory humans could be in the wilderness he'd thought he understood. The nightmares started immediately. Not about the physical danger. Marcus had dealt with bears, mountain lions, and natural disasters during his ranger career. The nightmares were about the systematic nature of it all. The way Thornton had studied him like a specimen, learned his habits and weaknesses, turned his own abilities into tools for manipulation. But more than that, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the other names on Thornton's list. The victims who'd been written off as accidents, the families who'd never gotten answers, the predators who were still out there, still hunting. That's what drove him to become a private investigator specializing in missing persons cases. The tracking abilities that had made him exceptional as a ranger translated perfectly to finding people who didn't want to be found. Or more importantly, finding the people who were hunting them. Marcus opened his practice in Austin, Texas, where the dry heat reminded him daily that he'd survived something that was supposed to kill him. He works primarily with families of missing persons whose cases have gone cold, using his exceptional tracking abilities to find evidence that traditional investigators miss. But he also takes on a different kind of case, helping people who are running from predators that law enforcement can't or won't stop, human trafficking victims who need to disappear completely, abuse survivors whose attackers have too much money or influence for normal justice, people who've discovered that sometimes the monsters wear badges or business suits instead of fangs. Marcus learned something important that night in Olympic National Park. The most dangerous predators are the ones who think they're smarter than everyone else. Thornton had been so confident in his superiority, so sure that his military training and high-tech equipment made him invincible, that he never considered he might be facing someone with skills he couldn't understand or account for. The forest had taught Marcus to read signs that others missed. Thornton had taught him that the most important skill isn't just seeing what others can't see, it's knowing when to use that knowledge to fight back instead of just survive. 3 years later, Marcus's PI practice has helped solve 47 missing persons cases and assisted in the prosecution of 8 different human trafficking operations. He's developed a reputation among law enforcement agencies across the Southwest as someone who can find people that everyone else has given up on. But he never goes into remote areas alone anymore, never trusts technology completely, and he always carries multiple backup plans for when the equipment fails and the forest goes silent. Because Marcus learned the hardest lesson a ranger can learn. The real monsters aren't the ones hiding in the woods. They're the ones who think they own them, and sometimes the only way to stop a hunter is to become a better one. The whistle still echoes in his dreams sometimes, that mocking sound from between the trees, the audio signature of a predator who thought he was playing with helpless prey. But now, when Marcus hears it in nightmares, he doesn't run. He tracks it back to its source and makes sure it never whistles again. And if you know someone who works in remote areas or someone who's trying to escape from people who shouldn't find them, share this story. Stay safe out there. And remember, the most dangerous wilderness isn't the one without cell phone coverage. It's the one where predators have learned to use your isolation against you. If you enjoyed this account and want to hear more stories about the real dangers lurking in places we're supposed to feel safe, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the best way to avoid becoming prey is understanding how the hunters think.